people. UN peacekeeping forces in Lebanon also shot down an Israeli drone. The UN forces said the drone had dropped a grenade near the... Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Venezuela is denouncing the U.S. for docking a United States warship in Trinidad and Tobago as tensions in the region continue to rise. The Pentagon's also sending the world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, to the Caribbean. The carrier can hold 90 airplanes and attack helicopters. On Friday, the Pentagon announced the U.S. had struck yet another vessel in the Caribbean, killing 6 people. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the victims were suspected drug traffickers, but offered no proof. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro accused President Trump of fabricating a war.
Y el pueblo de los Estados Unidos lo sabe.
And the people of the United States know that they're making up a new eternal war. They promised that they will never enter a war, and they're making up a war that we will avoid. How? With the mobilization of the peoples of South America. As South America and the Caribbean all say, no to war, yes to peace, yes to prosperity, yes to harmony, and living together.
On Friday, the Trump administration sanctioned Colombian President Gustavo Petro, his wife, and other Colombian officials. In recent weeks, Petro's denounced the U.S. attacks on boats in the Caribbean. Also on Friday, 10 former Caribbean leaders denounced Trump's military escalation in the region. The former leaders wrote, quote, "The gravity of the present signals demand we use all existing channels for dialogue to perpetuate a zone of peace," unquote. We'll have more on this story after headlines. An Israeli drone strike in southern Gaza has killed 2 people as Israel continues to attack Palestinians 2 weeks after the U.S. brokered ceasefire went into effect. Officials in Gaza say Israel's killed about 100 Palestinians over the past 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Israel's continuing to limit aid into the famine-stricken Gaza Strip. This all comes as Hamas is expanding its search for the remains of 13 deceased Israeli hostages in Gaza. Over the weekend, a team from Egypt and the Red Cross entered Gaza to help with the search. We'll have more on Gaza later in the program. We'll speak with Dropsite News' Jeremy Scahill. On Sunday, Israel carried out multiple strikes in Lebanon, killing 3 people. UN peacekeeping forces in Lebanon also shot down an Israeli drone. The UN forces said the drone had dropped a grenade near the peacekeepers. Israel denied the claim. The U.S. federal government shutdown has entered its 27th day. Funding for food assistance programs used by over 40 million people will run out on Saturday. Democratic lawmakers have criticized the Trump administration for refusing to draw on a contingency fund to continue funding SNAP and WIC benefits. Meanwhile, President Trump has said military troops will keep getting paid, in part due to a $130 million private donation. The New York Times has revealed the donor to be the reclusive right-wing billionaire Timothy Mellon. Budget experts say using a private donation to pay troops would violate federal law. Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut appeared on CNN Sunday and said Trump is using the shutdown to expand his power.
He likes the fact that the government is closed because he thinks he can exercise king-like powers. He can open up the parts of the government that he wants. He can pay the employees who are loyal to him. I mean, this is a leader who is trying to transition our government from a democracy to something much closer to a totalitarian state.
President Trump has arrived in Japan, the second stop on his Asia trip. On the flight to Japan, Trump refused to rule out running for a 3rd term in 2028, even though the 22nd Amendment forbids a president from being elected to office more than twice. On Sunday, Trump met in Malaysia with leaders of Thailand and Cambodia who signed a deal to expand their ceasefire. On Thursday, Trump will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea during the APEC summit. Over the weekend, the U.S. and China agreed to the framework of a new trade deal. On Saturday, over 1,000 South Korean protesters rallied in Seoul to protest ahead of Trump's arrival.
나라 살림을 더 많이 지금 돌봐야 되는 상황.
At a time when our country should be focused on managing our own finances, the U.S. is acting like a robber, sudden, coercive, and almost plundering us, asking us to invest $350 billion, which is an absurd amount and nearly 80% of our foreign reserves, in the U.S. all of a sudden is far too forceful. I believe South Korea should firmly express its refusal to this demand.
In other trade news, President Trump's announced he's raising tariffs on Canada by 10%. The move coming in response to an ad produced by the government of Ontario that featured a clip of former President Ronald Reagan warning of the dire consequences of high tariffs. In Argentina, far-right President Javier Milei's party won a decisive victory in Argentina's midterm elections, picking up 14 seats in the Senate and 64 in the lower house of Congress. But it's still short of a congressional majority for Milei's party. It comes after President Trump earlier this month promised a $40 billion bailout for Argentina if Milei's party was victorious in these elections. After the results, Trump told reporters, quote, "We've made a lot of money based on that election," unquote. Since taking office in 2023, Milei has imposed painful austerity measures on Argentina, slashing thousands of government jobs and curbing public investments in infrastructure, healthcare, and education, which led to widespread protests. Earlier this year, Milei appeared on stage with Elon Musk at the conservative CPAC conference in the U.S., wielding a chainsaw and giving it to Elon Musk to symbolize cuts to government programs. Voters in Ireland have elected the independent socialist Catherine Connolly to be president. Connolly's a critic of NATO, who's accused the United States and Britain of enabling genocide in Gaza. She spoke to supporters in Dublin Saturday.
I will be a president who listens and who reflects and who speaks when it's necessary, and a voice for peace, a voice that builds on our policy of neutrality, a voice that articulates the existential threat posed by climate change.
The United Nations is calling for the safe passage of civilians trapped in al-Fasher in Sudan's Darfur region after the UAE-backed paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, announced they've seized the Sudanese army's main base in al-Fasher. The Sudanese army has yet to acknowledge they've lost control of al-Fasher. The city's been besieged by the RSF for 18 months, leading to widespread famine. The civil war in Sudan erupted in 2023. Since then, more than 150,000 people have died across the country, and about 12 million have fled their homes. Hurricane Melissa has intensified to a rare Category 5 hurricane expected to make landfall in Jamaica Tuesday and pass through Cuba and the Bahamas later this week. Melissa could be the most powerful storm to hit Jamaica in recent years. The U.S. National Hurricane Center in Miami warned Jamaicans to remain sheltered during the storm. Forecasters are warning of catastrophic flash flooding and landslides throughout the Caribbean. In Virginia, a 24-year-old Honduran man was fatally struck by a vehicle while fleeing federal immigration agents Thursday. Josue Castro Rivera is at least the fourth immigrant to be killed during an immigration operation under the Trump administration. Meanwhile, protests are continuing in Chicago over ongoing ICE raids. On Saturday in northwest Chicago, federal agents deployed tear gas at residents who gathered to protest ICE activity. The incident occurred as parents and children in the neighborhood were preparing for a Halloween parade. Meanwhile, White House advisor Stephen Miller appeared on Fox News Friday, suggesting Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker could be arrested for seditious conspiracy for obstructing the enforcement of federal immigration laws.
Different kinds of crimes would apply. There's obstruction of justice, there is harboring illegal aliens, there is impeding the enforcement of our immigration laws, and then as you get up the scale of behavior, you obviously get into seditious conspiracy charges, depending on the conduct, and many other offenses.
A federal judge has ruled ICE agents illegally detained a Chicago man whose daughter is undergoing cancer treatment. Ruben Torres Maldonado is a painter and home renovator who was detained by immigration authorities at a Home Depot in suburban Chicago earlier this month. In his ruling, U.S. District Judge Jeremy Daniel said Maldonado's detention violated his due process rights and that he must be given a bond hearing by October 31st. In Maryland, hundreds of activists and Democratic state legislators rallied in Annapolis Saturday, calling on Governor Wes Moore to end the state's contract with Avelo Airlines, a private airline carrying out deportation flights. Avelo has cut several routes amidst growing backlash in a nationwide boycott after it signed a $150 million contract with ICE earlier this year. This is Maryland State Senator Clarence Lamb.
When it comes to the state of Maryland, we have this airline that's flying through BWI Airport that we don't believe shares our values. And so anything that we can do to shut down these ICE flights, many of which are probably illegal, as we've seen from Supreme Court determinations, that we want to do our part. And if we can stop Avelo from flying out of BWI, that would be all the better for our state.
U.S. immigration authorities detained the prominent British Muslim journalist and commentator Sami Hamdi on Sunday at San Francisco International Airport. Hamdi was detained hours after he spoke in Sacramento at a gala for CARE, that's the Council on American Islamic Relations. In a statement, CARE said, quote, abducting a prominent British Muslim journalist and political commentator on a speaking tour in the United States because he dared to criticize the Israeli government's genocide is a blatant affront to free speech, CARE said. The far-right activist Lara Loomer, who's described herself as a proud Islamophobe, took credit for his detention, saying she'd pressured the Trump administration to revoke his visa. And here in New York, Democratic Socialist mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani spoke before 13,000 supporters in Forest Hill, Queens on Sunday night.
Together, New York, we're going to freeze the... Together, New York, we're going to make buses fast and... Together, New York, we're going to deliver universal... We will make our city one where every person who calls it home can live a dignified life.
Mamdani spoke alongside Senator Bernie Sanders, New York Congressmember Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who's endorsed Mamdani over former Governor Andrew Cuomo. In recent days, Mamdani has repeatedly faced a string of Islamophobic attacks. If elected, Mamdani would be the first Muslim mayor. Early voting began on Saturday. A record 164,000 people cast ballots on the first few days. In a late endorsement, Democratic Congressmember Hakeem Jeffries has also backed Mamdani. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!
Some more airtime, bro. Everything else is yak.
Yeah.
We're giving up way too many points. Like, they didn't run the ball, but they didn't have to. And they aren't a running defense anyway. Offense. They're like 15s. They're mid-pack.
Shit, they didn't do a bad job running the ball, though. Jacobs in 23, they were toting that pill. 23 was toting that joint, too, for sure. Like, him and Jacobs was toting. He was able to get the ball off fast. Their offense in the first half, I wasn't as mad. You know what I'm saying? Like,
No, I was like, okay. I was concerned, but I wasn't tripping.
It was just more too for me. The offense didn't have anytime we got behind the sticks, like the penalties, the first down runs when we're only gaining maybe 1 yard. If we're getting stopped behind the backfield, then it's like the drives always get killed with that. And then we were able to win with when Bob's getting those field goals, but we got to be able to score touchdowns instead of keep getting field goals. Do you know what I'm saying?
Bruh, I totally understand what you're saying. Don't get me wrong. We got some offensive issues. Like, we were, 1 of 10 on third downs, 1 of 11, something like that. Like, we can't keep drives together. We stall out. And when we can keep a drive together, or we're looking like we're able to keep a drive together, we get penalties that stop it. Like, we are freaking cooked. Like, we're cooked, bro.
That was.
I'm going to break down why it's not just scheme, it's not just execution, but it's also discipline. And that might be the worst of it all. We'll talk about it here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host. There's things in this game that just needed to be better. It was how the Steelers lost this game to me that made this a lot worse and showed a lot worse for the Steelers moving forward. The defense got torched by the Packers on the whole. Jordan Love was 29 of 37 for 360 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, was never sacked, no turnovers for a third straight game, I think, for the Steelers. But for me, what makes this worse is that the Steelers did come out and have the right plan in place, the right play calls, the right stratagems to counter what the Packers wanted to do on offense. And then that plan fell apart in the second half, all because of a few big plays they gave up. The Steelers did allow a first half touchdown, but for the most part, they locked it down on the Packers and what they wanted to do. Josh Jacobs was not a threat at all night. The Packers' number one third down offense was 0 for 4 on third downs through the first half, and that helped the Steelers build a 16-7 lead going into halftime while they were set to get the ball at half. Everything was lining up the way you wanted it to line up if you were the Steelers in that first half. And then depression set in. Because Deshaun Elliott, well, first of all, you come out, and I think they went 3 and out to open the second half on offense. But then one mistake led to another, and things start to fall apart. Deshaun Elliott gets injured on a play where he was definitely shoved to the ground by Tucker Kraft on a third down duck of a pass from Jordan Love. He just threw it up because he was under pressure, and Tucker Kraft just throws Deshaun Elliott to the ground, catches it, takes off running. Elliott gets back into chase mode. Thornhill's unable to bring it down. And then eventually when Elliott does bring him down, twists his knee. That could be a really bad injury. I find it hard to believe that he's going to be able to dodge a major knee injury there. He dodged one earlier this year where they thought that he might be gone for the season. He came back a few weeks later, and he's been really important to the Steelers. But that was a tough loss right there, and that led to eventually a wide receiver touchdown screen where Darius Slay looked like he didn't even want to try to make a play on the tackle in the red zone. We'll come back to Slay later because there's a lot there with Darius Slay, in my opinion. But it's bigger than just him now, or bigger than just one guy or a couple guys. After that drive where they gave up that big play to Kraft and then the wide receiver screen, the mistakes grew, and they grew fast. They spread rapidly across the defense, and that mostly, and it was disappointing to see because they had mostly played a good game up to that point, and they had things in place to keep the game in check. Joey Porter Jr., who looked good in the first half, right? Broke up a pass on third down over the middle, started jumping out of position, giving up big holes in the defense. And that appeared to be the thing that we saw the most throughout the night. Players jumping out of their assignments to play hero ball, thinking that they were going to do something to make a play, cause a turnover, and compromising the defensive integrity of the concepts and schemes that they called. Then when that started to happen, guys completely left their assignments wide open. Where they lined up, if they lined up in zone, you saw them stop anticipating where the Packers were trying to attack, and they weren't pinching down with their zones on the primary reads for Jordan Love and his intended targets, and that opened up the pass game even more for the Packers. When they lined up a man, they just straight up got cooked, whether it was because they just got beat with bad alignment, or they just had a bad matchup in trying to line up who they were going to get on different guys. And it's one thing when you're just losing to, one of the best wide receiver duos in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but against the Packers offense that should not be overwhelming you with their wide receiver talent. They're a good wide receiver room, but I get the Bengals overwhelming you with wide receiver talent. I would get the Vikings overwhelming you with wide receiver talent. But the Packers are just a good room. They're not an elite room. And that became a big problem for the Steelers. And that could be a big problem for the season moving forward if the Steelers can't contain even a group like this. I know some people are going to look at the Steelers pass rush as the main problem of this game because they didn't get a sack. But the fact is that Jordan Love, on average for the night, got passes off before 2.5 seconds after the snap of the ball. That's not going to allow most pass rushers to win at all. And that just can't be a thing if you're the Steelers that want to play defense the way that you're supposed to play defense by letting your pass rush win. The problem is that, especially in the second half, the Steelers weren't taking away Jordan Love's first read, and he was allowed to drop back, get into his rhythm, and they didn't knock him off of it. Now, early in the game, I did feel like they knocked him off of it, and he was able to avoid sacks, but you saw he wasn't getting the placement he wanted. He wasn't finding his reads as consistently, especially on third down. Again, they could not convert third down in the first half. But then in that second half, consistently, whoever Love wanted to target in the second half.
How much do you think you're spending on subscriptions? Chances are it's more than you realize, especially if there's one from a couple months ago you forgot to cancel. Don't leave to do that yet. Why not?
They didn't knock him off of it. Now, early in the game, I did feel like they knocked him off of it, and he was able to avoid sacks, but you saw he wasn't getting the placement he wanted. He wasn't finding his reads as consistently, especially on third down. Again, they could not convert third down in the first half. But then in that second half, consistently, whoever Love wanted to target in the second half, whether it was after that Kraft catch where Deshaun Elliott got hurt, Love got what he wanted. And even when the Steelers had everything covered, Juan Thornhill allowed a duck of a pass to go right over his head that he should have intercepted, and that became an issue. It seemed like after that, and that led to another touchdown, there were just mistakes that compounded upon each other. And after the game, Tomlin acknowledged something that I thought was really important, that he did acknowledge that, and something he really hasn't before, that they needed to be better in several areas, especially when he especially acknowledged when it came to the plan, the problem that they put together, the problems that they saw in this game are repetitive problems that they've seen before. That's something that he's denied when we've talked to him, in his Tuesday press conferences and his post-game press conferences. In general, he has refused to talk about that. He talks to keep the focus forward, but listen to the way that he answers this question, and then listen to the way that he responds to my question at the end of this clip that I'm going to show you here, because I thought this was very interesting as far as how he talked about it when he notes quote, positions we put the players in. Here's Mike Tomlin.
Mike, the defensive problems that you've had repeatedly, is it rooted in the scheme or in the execution of the scheme?
We all have to own it. Certainly you start with the schematics, man, because that's the leadership component of it. And certainly we'll be looking at everything that we're doing, man, because some of these problems are somewhat repetitive and we're not getting better fast enough.
Mike, what's missing in the execution?
Again, I'm not going to talk too much tonight. We'll take a look at it. As I mentioned, they made some significant plays on possession down ball. And, you got to get off on third down. And we didn't do it well enough. And particularly in the third quarter, there was some significant ones.
Mike, you guys assembled this secondary with the hopes to use several different coverages, man, zone, and different things, but between miscommunications and just losing and man, what do you guys have to do better to get the potential that you saw?
We just got to be better in all areas, and it starts first with the positions that we put players in. And so, as coaches, as players, as all of us, we own it. We'll be better. We have to be.
That last part there where he said it's the positions we put players in, and he noticed it's coaches and players because there's a hand-in-hand part in that. That, to me, is the first real acknowledgement from Mike Tomlin that the Steelers' pass defense plan didn't work and needs to change. Now, this doesn't mean that Mike Tomlin hasn't thought about this stuff before, but he rarely throws stuff out there that can say, hey, there's problems here and there. There's probably, he will try to kind of circle the wagons, protect his guys, and deal with things in-house. That's a little different. And to me, that means he might be feeling like, hey, this is a bigger problem. And, if you remember last week when we talked to him on Tuesday, after the Bengals game, he talked about the run defense being the issue. And again, the run defense wasn't the issue in this one. They shut down Josh Jacobs. They really took away the Packers run game. It comes down to purely the pass defense, and especially the coverage and how the blitzes and the coverage, I don't think, align real well right now. And if that is what Mike Tomlin's insinuating, that he's acknowledging it now and that things need to change, I think he's right. And in general, I think I'm a patient person. I don't overreact. I don't do knee-jerk reactions because oftentimes things balance out over time and things get figured out. But this secondary has shown consistently through 8 weeks now, 4-3, so that's 7 games, 8 weeks, you know what I'm saying? 8 weeks now that they cannot cover in man consistently well, and they haven't responded well in zone coverage when they're trying to pull off their disguises either. They've had their moments, but in general, they're still having these big problems, and something has to give, whether that's Terrell Austin, the defensive coordinator, being the play caller for the defense. That's one thing we can explore more as we get into the all 22 later in a day or two here. A major change in personnel usage, which we've discussed here on this show a few times. Maybe some switches at outside corner, who plays what safety role, and that's going to have to change anyways if Sean Elliott's injury is as serious as it looked. Or maybe a switch in philosophy that has the defense and less single high safety looks, and maybe plays more Tampa 2, where they keep two safeties high to back up the cornerbacks. Or maybe it's all of the above. Either way, if the Steelers want to be a good team in 2025, they cannot afford the defense to play the way it has through the bulk of this first half of the season. They also need to be a more disciplined team. And Cam Hayward had some strong words on that. I'll explain more of why that's a big problem, maybe even a bigger problem for Mike Tomlin to address. And we'll do that right after this break here on the Locked On Steelers. The Steelers' defensive plan seemed to have several answers for the Packers early on. But once that big play to Tucker Kraft happened, where Elliott got hurt, and then the other big play to Christian Watson, where Juan Thornhill misplayed the deep ball, it was like the game plan went away and the players abandoned their roles. And that's not what you're supposed to do when things get tough. You're supposed to tighten up. Remember your keys that you studied on to focus on for this game. Play within the structure of what you're supposed to do and make the plays that you can within that structure. And unfortunately for the Steelers, that's not what happened on defense. When the Packers made big plays, the Steelers responded poorly. And Cam Hayward kind of called that out when I was asking him questions in the Steelers locker room. Listen to Cam Hayward kind of being a little honest about things in the Steelers locker room after the game.
Cam, you guys talked about stopping the run going into this game, and you guys looked like you guys largely did stop the run, but still gave up a lot of points, a lot of yards. What do you guys have to do better to be better against the pass right now?
You got to, verse it a lot better, man. I think this game kind of wrote it in the second half, and big plays were, the death of us today. You're not going to be perfect out there, but you got to keep fighting. I just think there's a lot of ball and, not enough fight on our side.
Do you think the fight problem is happening because of the big plays and you guys don't rebound well enough?
Yeah, I don't think we handle adversity. That second half, it just kind of split open. If you get hit hard enough, you got to have answers for it. Part of being a professional is fixing your mistakes fast and answering those problems. I think this is a lesson we all can learn from. But hopefully it hits home fast.
What's the challenge for a team with a lot of veterans to have a turnaround in the fight, in the response to adversity, or the message you guys have to have? It's not like there's a whole bunch of young guys who are adjusted to the NFL. A lot of these guys have experience.
Yeah. Just learn from your mistakes. And you can't be perfect out there, but you can learn and see what a defense or our offense is trying to do for you. And then I think just owning it. I'm not, like I said, I don't think anybody needs to be perfect, but if you can own your mistake and make sure that disappears, it goes a long way.
Where's your confidence level still in the defensive unit?
Very high.
I think the respond to adversity part of Cam's answer speaks volumes to what happened in the Steelers' Sunday night loss. Once the problems emerged, especially on defense, the lack of commitment to their assignments grew. And then you even saw some players not following through on what their assignment was, even when they were in position to make the play. Like Darius Slay on that wide receiver screen to Savion Williams. It was just completely inexcusable. And frankly, so was a lot of Slay's efforts of late. He was in position. Listen, the Packers did some good blocking up front, but Slay was left unblocked, could have pinned to the sideline and at least knocked Williams out of bounds. He does none of that. He barely puts an effort into the tackle, and Williams just kind of walks in for the touchdown. That's inexcusable effort, and that's not a rookie that has to learn the tenacity of the game. That's not someone who might have been caught up. That's Darius Slay, who's supposed to be the former All-Pro veteran that's making the right, striking the right tone, being a good locker room guy, being a good leader, showing an example of how to play tough even when things aren't going your way. And to me, that's a big problem if he's giving you that kind of effort on a very basic request of him in that position. And it's not just Slay either. You could also point to Cole Holcomb. He was out of position a lot early on in this game. And it's not even going to be, be a whole lot. You could talk about Joey Porter too, jumping out of his assignments, or Patrick Queen, I think, not pinching his zone assignments correctly at times. A lot of it comes back to discipline to keep their role sound in the defensive structure. And sometimes also, as Mike Tomlin's acknowledging, sometimes that defensive structure maybe needed to be a little bit different on certain looks, and maybe needed to try to pinch a different thing. To me, that's the big thing the Steelers are focusing on. But now you also have to add dumb penalties into the mix, because Nick Herbig's penalty, I can kind of understand. Live, I missed Skoranek being hit, and so I thought, oh man, I just saw Nick Herbig coming in late. And again, this is kind of what happens when those mistakes get made. But Nick Herbig, came into his defense. He was getting hit late. Sure, that was bad, and that's forgivable. But DK Metcalf's personal foul penalty wasted a 3rd and 2 situation where the run game was starting to get back. They were starting to use the run game in the fourth quarter. They were going to try to use that to get back in it, and they still had a chance to turn a 3rd and 2 into a 3rd and 17, all because they got into an altercation and he tried to poke the guy in the eye or whatever. And at that point in the game, the Steelers were down just 10 points with 10-14 left in the fourth quarter. And the run game still could have impacted the game. They could have run the ball down the field, set up some play action, get a touchdown, and all of a sudden you're down 3 and you're still in the game. But then Metcalf's penalty makes it a 3rd and 17. Aaron Rodgers gets sacked, and that was basically the end of the game right there. Those are the things that Tomlin cannot have from a team that has several veterans on both sides of the ball that are supposed to set the tone and be the example of what to do in the right moments. These should not be NFL vets being caught up with problems and causing more issues to the plans of the team, as when it comes to personal fouls and things like that. Tomlin has to stomp that out right now, and it's something that should have been stomped out before, but you saw it kind of creep up in this game as the Steelers' frustration started to compound more and more, tit for tat, more and more going back and forth with the Packers. That's not what you want to be as a team. That's not being disciplined. And I think even in the Steelers' losses this year, you could see, hey, they made a mistake here, but they didn't lose their heads. They weren't the ones being fiery and doing silly things. This was losing your head. And if this continues, that's going to be a really big problem, because it's going to lead the Steelers' frustrations turning to the more big mistakes, and it's going to make winning a lot harder. It's already been difficult for the Steelers this season with their tough schedule. They've had injuries, they've had growing pains, they've had all sorts of issues. But if that gets compounded with undisciplined football, whether that's abandoning your role in the defense or committing dumb penalties that cost you yards in important moments, this season is going to fully unravel, and fast. And I know some people are going to say, well, it's fully unraveled already. No, it's not, because they're 4-3. They're still atop the division. And if they turn things around, as we've seen them turn things around before, they can absolutely still have a good season out of this. And the fortunate part of that is that they won a lot of those earlier games, getting to 4-1, where these 2 losses don't destroy them. They do hurt. They do waste an opportunity that could have been to put your foot on the throat of everyone else in your division. But you're still in a position where you can, if you turn things around, you can control your season. And despite all the negativity that comes from a loss like this, I do think there were positives in this game, particularly because the offense did put up 25 points. They still weren't perfect, but I want to talk about something that's happening on offense that we said had to have happened this year if you wanted the Steelers to find a path moving forward in the coming seasons. We'll talk about that next year on the Locked On Steelers podcast, because the O-line balled out. I'll talk about that more here in a second on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. Be right back.
These scripts with 28 font, You have Canada working on a trade. Just look at him. Sickly, weak, lethargic. The entire world senses it. This is Donald Trump in Asia right now. You see him, he's reading off of these scripts with 28 font. You have Canada working on a trade deal with China to remove the 100% tariffs on electric vehicles into Canada. Looks like the BYD EVs are now going to be flooding into Canada, destroying America auto manufacturing in Canada. Great work there, Donald. You also have the president of South Korea talking about the grave damage Donald Trump has done, the potentially irreparable harm Donald Trump has done as ICE agents attacked the South Koreans at the battery plant in Georgia. You also have Democrats here in the United States sensing Donald Trump's lack of care, concern, or even focus on what's happening here in the United States. And Democrats have finally made some very strong moves in order to counteract Donald Trump's attempt to rig the midterms. We're seeing Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries go to Illinois. We've seen Democrats in Virginia getting ready to redistrict there. New York potentially redistricting. Maryland potentially redistricting. We're seeing Democrats across the country following the lead of California Governor Gavin Newsom with Prop 50 and figuring out how to neutralize Donald Trump's efforts to rig the elections. And as the Trump regime is saying that it will deprive 42 million Americans of their supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits, trying to starve Americans to death. That's what the Trump regime is trying to do right now. At least 22 Democratic attorney generals getting ready to file a massive lawsuit against the Trump regime for their cruel and unusual starvation tactics against the American people. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's oligarchs showing their true colors. It's obvious who they are, but you have Jeff Bezos planning to cut over 30,000 corporate jobs at Amazon. Meanwhile, you had that Washington Post op-ed that tried to glorify Donald Trump's ripping to shreds of the East Wing of the White House. I think the Washington Post said it's Donald Trump versus the NIMBYs. How utterly despicable is that? Just want to go through step by step again what's going down. You see here again the sickly, weak Donald Trump. You see his script right here. You take a look at what it says. Today, alongside this peace treaty, we're also signing a major trade deal with Cambodia and a very important critical minerals agreement with Thailand. The United States will have robust commerce and cooperation with both nations as long as they live in peace. As you know, this is one of the 8 wars my administration has ended in just 8 months. Nothing like this has ever been done in history. He's a walking, talking, utter embarrassment, a walking, talking fool. Weakness masquerading as strength, just a humiliating thing in Asia right now, disgracing the United States. Here was Donald Trump getting all touchy-feely with the Japanese emperor, which you're not supposed to do. Now, what's going on in the homeland right now? You have Democrats led by Hakeem Jeffries doing what I think we've always wanted them to do, getting aggressive in remapping the congressional lines. I mentioned Virginia, I mentioned New York, I mentioned Maryland, and I should have mentioned, and I'll do it right now, Illinois, because that's where Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries was. I mentioned the AGs getting ready to file the lawsuit against the Trump regime for depriving the country of SNAP benefits, even though there's an emergency fund to deal with this. Apparently, Argentina far more important than starving Americans to Donald Trump. Yep, Argentina gets $40 billion of taxpayer money, while 42 million Americans Donald Trump gives the middle finger to and says, you need to starve to death. That's what it means to live in the Trump regime. Meanwhile, not only is California pushing forward Prop 50, which is very popular, you have California Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Banta, they are now going to deploy their own election monitors to monitor the election monitors that the Trump regime is sending to try to intimidate people voting for Prop 50. Counteract, go on the offensive, use your moral authority, use your formal authority. And Prime Minister Carney of Canada also is doing just that in a major break with the US. Canada seems like it will be dropping.
Hey, this is Senator John Ossoff in Georgia.
This year, and that is that the DOJ has declined to pursue charges against two people who threatened to kill Congressman Eric Swalwell. And I frame this in light of the Charlie Kirk situation because obviously the DOJ was willing to put forward any resources necessary to fight what they said was left-wing violence or violence against right-wing figures. But now we have very clear, obvious, and proven violence against a left-wing member of Congress, a Democratic member of Congress, and there aren't these federal resources being allocated toward anybody who has a D next to their name. And so in light of this disparity, what does this mean moving forward for a movement that has largely relied on violence to get what they want? I mean, we have January 6th to look at as a very clear testament to that, in light of any of it kind of being prevented by the folks in charge.
Yeah, so everyone, look, this is about as important a video as Brian and I have ever done. You know, we've now done just over 300 videos, and this is a really important one. And so I want you to watch to the end, because we're going to cover a lot of things here that are unpleasant, but they are important for you to hear, and they're important for you to be equipped with good information about. So Brian, look, you know, the fact is that those of us who are standing up to Donald Trump, whether they are elected officials like the congressman, whether they are people like you, whether they are lawyers like me, we're really on our own. I mean, the fact is that the Department of Justice is not there to go after right-wing extremists. They are not there to go after people who may make threats against you or against me or against, you know, any number of other people who are viewed as opposition figures. And that is in addition to the threats that we face at the hands of the Trump administration itself, right? So in addition to, you know, what does it mean to be in the crosshairs of the Trump administration? What does it mean to have the President of the United States give a speech about me, for example, at the Department of Justice, or to target me in executive memorandum and orders? What does it mean for, you know, for you to offer content that he clearly hates every single day, and people in the White House know who you are? Like, that's one set of risks, but everyone needs to recognize what Brian's talking about here is something that's actually much more dangerous, which is that right-wing vigilantes, right-wing, you know, agitators, people who are going to take the law into their own hands, perhaps, for example, people who were pardoned by Donald Trump, who were involved in an insurrection in the nation's capital, who want to take violent retribution or want to engage in harassment or other unlawful behavior. I just don't think we can expect that federal law enforcement will do anything to protect us. I don't think that they will protect us proactively. I don't think they'll try to vindicate or solve any crimes that are committed. I mean, in some ways, Brian, look at the lies and the absolute disgraceful comments that were made when Speaker Pelosi's husband was assaulted in his house, assaulted, they tried to kill him. And what did Donald Trump do? He mocked it.
Right.
He spread false lies and information about it. What did we see when legislators in Minnesota were murdered in cold blood by what clearly is someone who was very disturbed and a right-wing, motivated by right-wing animus? They lied about it, and then they have kind of quietly omitted that from the list of violence that they care about.
By the way, so Mike Lee also mocked it. You had sitting U.S. senators who mocked it.
We are Vegas, baby. Stardust Casino. From the Strip to one of North America's fastest growing online casinos. Slots, blackjack, big jackpots. Play anytime, anywhere. Stardust. A legendary past. An electrifying future. Now lighting up Pennsylvania. Join today. Get 25 free spins with sign up.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and so I think we all need to be clear-eyed about the risks that people are running right now. And, you know, that's not to say that we shouldn't speak out loudly and stand tall. I do, and Brian does, and many other people who are in the public eye do, but we also need to recognize that the failure of the Trump Justice Department and FBI to go after someone who is threatening a member of Congress, one of only 435 people who are elected by the citizens of this country to represent them in Congress. You know, if they aren't going to protect Democratic members of Congress, who are they going to protect?
Well, I guess the bigger question then is this not a message that's being sent to people proactively who the Trump administration knows are going to be violent, knows are going to do their bidding? There are plenty of these right-wing paramilitary groups out there. We've seen them. They were in large part very active during January 6th. So how is this not a message to those people by saying, hey, when there are actionable threats against Democrats, we're very clearly not doing anything about it. When you have people who were locked up for committing violence on behalf of Donald Trump, we're going to give them pardons. And so how is that not a message to the next wave of people in advance of 2026 or in advance of any event, really, by saying that, hey, violence against the left is legal now?
Absolutely. I mean, look, Donald Trump is using and abusing the pardon power in so many different ways that it is sometimes hard to keep focused on the simplest way he is using it, which is to send exactly that message. I mean, he pardoned a bunch of people who not only broke into the nation's capital, not only tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, but some of whom assaulted police officers, some of whom tried to assault members of Congress. Like, he pardoned all of them. So what message did he send? The exact message he intended to send, which is that if you commit violence in the name of Donald Trump, if you do the thing that Donald Trump wants you to do, and it is violent, that it's a get out of jail free card.
Right.
And this is not a new message from him. And, you know, I'd add one more thing, Brian. You know, look at the rationale he gave to pardoning George Santos. Now, in fairness, Congressman Santos is a fraud and not violent, as far as we know. So there's no violence there. But among the reasons he said he pardoned George Santos was because he voted Republican.
Right.
Right? I mean, like, if that's the criteria, Brian, what safety is there?
Right. Well, then I guess that raises the obvious question here, which is, what do those people do? What do the Eric Swalwells of the world do? What does the next person who's the victim of physical political violence at the hands of some right-winger do if Pam Bondi and Donald Trump aren't going to lift a finger, are broadcasting that they're not going to lift a finger to get some type of vindication?
Yeah. So look, this is why I asked people at the beginning to watch this video to the end, because this is the really important part. And by the way, you know, hit the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber to this channel, and hit the bell to make sure you're alerted, because Brian and I do this content in order to make sure you are kept informed. And this is really important stuff. It's really dangerous times for us in democracy. And it's really an informed citizenry is the start to the answer to this question, right? We all need to stay aware and informed. We need to be clear-eyed. We cannot live in a fantasy world. And unfortunately, there are still too many Democrats. There are still too many people on the left who want to believe that we are living in a normal judicial system. We are living in a normal criminal justice system, that when prosecutors charge people or don't charge people, it's being done on the merits, that if the FBI says there's no case, then there must be no case. If they say there is a case, there must be a case. And I'm telling you, we have to, for the sake of democracy, for the sake of people's safety, we have to stop giving this presumption of benefit of the doubt to this Department of Justice. Okay, this is Pam Bondi's Department of Justice. Every federal prosecutor who works at the Department of Justice right now works for Pam Bondi. And so when people say, oh, they're a career prosecutor, yeah, they're a career prosecutor who's been willing to stay in their position to work for Pam Bondi. If they're an FBI agent, they're willing to stay an FBI agent to work for Kash Patel. So be very skeptical. It doesn't mean that you can never believe what they say, but be skeptical to start with. The second thing is we need to really, really implore governors, mayors, state officials, towns, that they are going to have to fill in this gap. I mean, the fact is, you know, you're in California, and I am sure that Gavin Newsom and the city authorities, whatever city you live in, they would take this seriously. And we've seen instances of that. And so we're going to have to, lean harder into federalism, into this idea that states and local governments are going to be the ones who are going to have to pick up a lot of this work.
And I should note for folks who are watching right now, Trump has already expressed his intention to go after Mark. And so I think the one small step that we can all take to help bolster his profile so that it makes it that much more difficult for them to be able to go after him is to support him publicly. And the best way to do that is to sign up for his news outlet. This way he's able to reach everybody beyond just relying on the social media platforms, a direct line from him to you in the event that he is targeted, or it goes even further than that. So I'm going to put the link to Democracy Docket right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. If you sign up for Democracy Docket, that's his way to be able to reach you directly. Mark,
and Brian, one of the things you said there that I want to hammer home is we also can't count on the legacy media. The legacy media has failed us in so many different ways in the pro-democracy movement. They fail us. They find new ways to fail almost every day. But I also don't have a whole lot of confidence based on how they have reported other stories that, that there would not be a certain element of take what the government says in good faith, cover the things that the FBI will confirm.
Right.
And so I think it's really important, whether it's Democracy Docket, whether it's Brian's YouTube channel or his Substack or his podcast, or for that matter, it's any number of other independent media. We're going to have to build a left of center pro-democracy media ecosystem. And Brian has been instrumental in that in a lot of different ways. But as much work as he puts into it or I put into it, it's only as strong as you all are willing to support it. We have.
At Drive Time, we make it easy.
Well, a federal judge in Chicago questioned federal immigration authorities Monday about continuing to fire tear gas at protesters and journalists despite her previous court order. U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Ellis ordered the government to preserve all video evidence of federal agents firing tear gas and pepper balls during protests against Trump's escalating immigration crackdown in the Chicago area. In one of the most dramatic instances, a masked ICE officer was filmed shooting a Chicago pastor in the head with a pepper ball while he prayed outside the Broadview ICE facility. The priest, David Black, is now part of a lawsuit against the Trump administration. Over the weekend, more than 250,000 people rallied in Chicago for the No Kings protests. The rally stretched for 2 miles. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson called for a general strike.
Donald Trump is using ICE as his private, militarized, occupying force. The only other entities that are funded greater than ICE are the United States military and China's military. But we are saying emphatically clear, we do not want troops in our city. We will not allow our cities to be occupied. So here's what we need to do in this moment. If my ancestors as slaves can lead the greatest general strike in the history of this country, taking it to the ultra-rich and big corporations, we can do the same today.
The No Kings protest came a day after the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to allow the deployment of the National Guard in the Chicago area. Other speakers at Saturday's No Kings protests included Democratic Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, whose district includes Chicago.
They want to normalize violence. They want to normalize cruelty. They want us to be okay with what they're doing so that you won't question what they do next. But let me be very clear to Donald Trump and all those criminals. You will not break the city of Chicago, ever.
Congresswoman Delia Ramirez joins us now to talk about the immigration crackdown in Chicago, the government shutdown, and more. Why don't we begin with the crackdown and the court hearing yesterday? The judge saying that the immigration officials were breaking rules when it came to shooting protesters and journalists with pepper balls, tear gassing them. Talk about what's happening in your city, Congressmember Ramirez.
Amy, we are under attack by our own federal government. In many cases, I have constituents who tell me that they feel like our city is under siege. And it's not just the city, It's the surrounding suburbs, in some cases 2 hours from the city of Chicago, where they're targeting communities, communities that have been safe, communities that have been thriving. And in some cases, as you're walking through some of these neighborhoods, they look like ghost neighborhoods because people are just not coming out. People are living in daily fear.
And Congresswoman, I wanted to ask you about this hearing which Judge Ellis questioned ICE officials about the use of body cameras, and they claim that they don't have money for body cameras in Chicago, and she ordered that the Border Patrol Chief Gregory Bovino be deposed about this.
How could ICE and Homeland Security say they have no money for body cameras? They have $200 million for Kristi Noem to get new jets. It just doesn't make sense. What we're seeing is an agency that has gone rogue, that has been emboldened, and that thinks that they're above the law. I mean, in the same vein, they said that they didn't have to follow the judge's order. The Director Hott, who was supposed to come before the judge yesterday, all of a sudden on Friday, immediately returned back to DC because they know that what they're doing is illegal. And we have to make sure that we continue to organize in the streets. And that's why you keep hearing us say, if you see ICE activity reported and recorded, because what ICE is stating and what we're seeing in the community, in the streets, is inconsistent.
And what do you say about the enormous mobilization at the community level in neighborhood after neighborhood in Chicago? Have you been surprised by that?
No, I know Chicago. I am part of the city, this beautiful city of community of 77 neighborhoods. You know, I said to you, people are living in fear. And at the same time, our neighbors, our community organizations, our leaders, our organizers are in the streets organizing. They're recording. They have rapid response teams. We're creating human buses to take kids to and from school so that parents don't have to be afraid, as what you've seen already happen when an ICE agent stops and drags a mother out of the car while the child is in the back. So we're doing a lot of organizing. We're winning in the courts because that footage is actually being used during litigation, and we're changing minds in Congress. I have colleagues of mine who would never have talked about defunding ICE, would never have talked about questioning ICE's leadership or the day-to-day activity, began to talk about perhaps we need to consider defunding. Perhaps we need to consider putting some strong legislation of accountability under an agency that now has gone rogue.
I want to talk about the government shutdown in its 21st day. As Trump breaks ground on this, what's expected to be well more than $250 million gold-gilded ballroom, maybe the symbol of the demolished walls of the White House is particularly significant at this time. And furloughed workers and those that are required to work, essential workers, are not being paid. You have constituents I want to ask about yours who could lose their supplemental nutritional assistance program, SNAP benefits. If you can talk about what's the central debate in the midst of this shutdown. The Democrats demanding that the assistance, the continued assistance around ACA, the Affordable Care Act, and SNAP continue, and the Republicans saying no. What is going to come of this? And explain, in your case, who's affected in Chicago?
Yeah. I mean, Amy, Donald Trump and his puppets, my colleagues, the Republicans in Congress, they've made it very clear. They want my constituents uninsured, they want them unhoused, and they want them unemployed. All while he is creating a $200 million gold project for the White House. All while Kristi Noem continues to spend our taxpayer dollars to build and to be able to purchase $200 million worth of jets. My constituents right now are asking themselves, how could our president hate us so much? How could he be so removed from the reality of the American people that while he brags about his golden rooms, I may not be able to feed my children tomorrow? because it's the cut in benefits and SNAP benefits. It's people who are not getting paid. Our staff, essential workers who have to pay a mortgage on November 1st, and they have to wonder, how do we keep taking in the calls from our constituents while also figure out how do we pay our own mortgages? This is the reality and the world that we're currently living in, and it's despicable. And Amy, here's the worst part of all that. It can change overnight. Mike Johnson can call us into session today. He can introduce a resolution that restores healthcare, that protects SNAP benefits, that protects the American people, but he's unwilling to do that. And half of his colleagues are not even in their districts. They're out on vacation all over the world. This shutdown is the clear embodiment of Donald Trump's leadership. Starve and let people die while the billionaires and his cronies enrich themselves.
Congresswoman Johnson and other Republicans keep claiming that the Democratic lawmakers have.
My daughter is being treated for leukemia.
There, I'm looking at people who can't cover and who can't tackle. Why? Well, you've seen the games. It's kind of the issue or issues. They can't cover, they can't tackle. So if it's plausible, I'm going to put this forth with respect, because Darius Slay has had a terrific career in the NFL. 5-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion, but he's currently got a nemesis that nobody ever defeats. And that's Father Time. He's 34 years old. He's 2 years older than any other corner in the league. That's all to his credit, all of it. In fact, I'm going to go the extra mile here because Slay has been on record vocally critical of Pro Football Focus. So I'm not even going to look at their grades, which, well, let's just say they're not favorable this year compared to previous years. But that's because I don't need to. I can look at the straight stats, the indisputable stats, and give you everything that you need. Throughout his career, quarterbacks have completed, on average, 59.6% of their passes. That includes this year. So for the whole body of work, 59.6%. This year, that figure is 76.9. Pretty much 20 percentage points higher. Over the course of his career, quarterbacks have had an 85.1 passer rating against him. That number is now 115.1, 30 percentage points higher. Over the course of his career, he has had a missed tackle percentage of 9.3. Now, 18.2. It has doubled. And if you saw the way he avoided, and I do mean avoided, tackles in the loss Sunday night to the Packers, let's just say he could have lost his starting job right then and there, right on the spot. And I think it's at least reasonable, maybe more than that Mike Tomlin benches him this week. Now, when you bench a corner, it's not the same as benching, say, I don't know, your center, where it's somebody taking all of the snaps. You just basically see a reduction in snaps. You see a reduction in the role. You see somebody moved to the inside where they'd been on the outside. You see them saved for nickel, saved for dime. I don't care. I don't care. Once more, start somewhere. Because the only thing any of us can be certain about right now is that what's taking place ain't it. This ain't it. And you're not just going to urge and cajole people into being effective. It's now almost the halfway point of the Steelers season. We know what this defense is. We know what this secondary is. And we know that 32nd out of 32 teams, well, that ain't it. So who do you replace him with? I would, in this case, in all candor, defer to what the coaches would know about the potential replacements. For example, Brandon Echols, Everybody loved what they saw of him. Outside, inside, his coverage, his getting his hand on the ball, his fight. My goodness, did he have fight? He's 6 years younger. His coverage figures for the season so far with the Steelers, and I'm going to really stress this, they're in a much smaller sample size, are way, way, way better than Slay's. He's participated in only 221 of them. That's 44%, though. And these are defensive snaps I'm talking about. He's also had 60 on special teams, but defensively, almost half the time. Again, Slay's been out there a lot more. But
So you applied for a new job and you got the interview. Now you gotta nail it. Adobe Acrobat AI Assistant can act as a practice partner so you can feel confident and prepared. Just use Adobe Acrobat Pro and AI Assistant on your resume and ask it to generate potential interview questions so you can think.
that time, quarterbacks have completed 63.6%.
There is some new reporting out of a Jonathan Karl book that obtained notes, Mike Pence's notes, that were accessed during the Jack Smith investigation into Trump's attempts to subvert the rule of law and the electoral results to keep himself in power after he lost in 2020. And what's interesting is this connects perfectly. So we have a serendipitous moment to plug in another clip from my appearance on Jubilee debating with a Trump supporter about this topic. But first, let me get to it because it's so disturbing to reflect on now that we have this new specific anecdote, the behavior of Trump after he lost an election in 2020 and then was doing everything. And we've gone through all the schemes. We don't do that again. But just on this specific part, which is trying to pressure his vice president when the vice president was overseeing the certification of the election, in this case, Biden's win, to reject those results and certify fraudulent ones. And this is the reporting. During the meeting, as reflected in the vice president's contemporaneous notes, the defendant Trump made knowingly false claims of election fraud, including bottom line won every state by 100,000 votes and we won every state, and asked regarding a claim his senior Justice Department officials previously had told him was false, including as recently as the night before. So he's already being told these things are false. What about 205,000 votes more in Pennsylvania than voters? The defendant and co-conspirator 2 then asked the vice president to either unilaterally reject the legitimate electors from the 7 targeted states or send the question of which slate was legitimate to the targeted states' legislatures. When the vice president challenged co-conspirator 2 on whether the proposal to return the question to the states was defensible, co-conspirator 2 responded, "Well, nobody's tested it before." The vice president then told the defendant, "Did you hear that? Even your own counsel's not saying I have that authority." The defendant responded, "That's okay. I prefer the other suggestion of the vice president rejecting the electors unilaterally." And then at one point, you have this. According to a preview of Jonathan Karl's new book, Retribution, the former vice president's notes from the call detail Trump trying to shame Pence into refusing to certify the results of the 2020 election. "If you do that, I made a big mistake 5 years ago," Trump told Pence, according to Pence's notes. Trump added, "You'll go down as a wimp." The president also reportedly told the vice president, "You listened to the wrong people." So as even hyper-conservative, at that time, very MAGA, Mike Pence was saying, what do you mean? What do you mean I can reject the certification of an election after all the states certified these results? You have the lawful electors. The vice president has the whole power of our entire democratic system on their shoulders, and they can do whatever they want and go, "No, that's not the right result. Send it back," or "Let me count different ones," or "I just reject these." Then what happens? You really think that's the constitutional intention? Absurd. But then Trump was saying you'll go down as a wimp. He was then posting publicly, angry at Mike Pence, etc. We all remember that story, but just a reminder of how blatant the anti-democratic intentions were. And then we're supposed to not say that Trump's authoritarian, wanting to get his vice president to unilaterally reject an election result so he could stay in power after he lost the election. And that came up during a particularly absurd back and forth over the topic of is supporting Trump patriotic or not. And this took place, which is the core question, right? If they're going to argue that, then are you saying Kamala Harris would have had the same power this go round when she was running against Trump and she was the vice president? So if Pence had that power, she would. And some of you are like, oh my gosh, how many times have we gone over this? Fair. It still hasn't been resolved. That's the crazy thing. They still haven't just admitted, okay, they were wrong on that. And that was a crazy thing for him to try to do and very against our democracy. That's what came up here. While you watch it, please do click the subscribe button. If you're enjoying your viewing experience, all you got to do is click, and then you help this show.
Trump.
So it's so interesting that came up because it's been a while since I've talked about that because it was so thoroughly litigated on this show that I felt like it got a little bit redundant, even though it's so important, so I shouldn't feel that way. But then it came up there, and it feels like that's just his squirming reaffirms that it's indefensible. Because it's not like some of the other things that Trump has done that are a little bit more difficult to compare to any. This is so directly comparable to the election that just happened, where Harris, just like Biden, whenever Trump won the 2016 election, as vice president, would have whatever power you're saying Pence had. And if the response is, well, no, because there was real election fraud claims, that's why it would have been okay for Pence. Well, there's a bunch of people who make such claims about like every election, by the way. And then for it to shift to, what was he saying? And I've heard this before, which is actually Pence was getting ready to do what Trump asked him to do. So then they facilitated a fake FBI-led insurrection to stop to stop Pence from rejecting the results. And for some reason, after the Fedsurrection or the Antifa-surrection, then that made Pence have to certify the results. But then you have his own notes, his own telling of the story, every person around him, and Trump saying he never intended on doing it. Trump says the same thing. He says Pence didn't have the courage. Why do you think Trump, it doesn't make any sense, was out there railing against Pence if Pence was planning on doing it? And then you have these notes in this reporting about the call. My gosh, it's I'm feeling all the rage that I was cloaking in laughter there now. No wonder I just had so many people text. I was pulling my hair out watching that. But I don't know what I'm supposed to do in that environment. I felt like I broke it down simply as I could. Okay, we agree? And he said, yeah, I do agree. And I go, so then what about Pence? And then he goes to some Fedsurrection conspiracy. Mind-blowing. I don't know if I am comfortable debating anything else, even though we did a bunch of other topics. But I don't know if I can take you seriously if that question can't be clearly answered. And then how you support Trump after that, I don't know. And Trump just keeps railing against the 2020 election. He's obsessed, saying after winning 3 elections, false by a lot, I'm now getting the best polling numbers, not true, that I've never received. People see how strong the economy is, the trillions of dollars invested pouring into the country, the record setting, ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. At one point, he says this: despite all this, the radical left losers are taking fake ads, not showing real polls, but rather saying that I'm polling at low levels, because he is. These are the people that I've been beating for years, and I'm continuing to do so, but by even bigger margins. These ads should not be allowed to run because they're fake. So media figures who say stuff he doesn't like, they shouldn't be allowed to be on the air. He's going to sue outlets if they do coverage or make edits that he doesn't like. He thinks protesters should be locked up when they scream at him at a restaurant. And now he's saying reporting on polling that looks bad for him shouldn't be allowed. And this is supposed to be the free speech warrior. Now, a lot of supporters of his will say that any polling now showing Trump is not popular among the American people. Can't be true because he won the election. Same people who, after Biden won a larger popular vote margin, after a few seconds said he was unpopular. And Biden did in the polls get unpopular eventually in his presidency. So that doesn't square, for one. They were fine saying the polls showed horrible things for Biden even after he won a huge election. And I think they justify it with, well, everyone said Trump couldn't win, so the polls can't be right. But when he's won, the polls have shown him either very close, like people rewrite history on Hillary Clinton. It was clear he had a shot. And then in 2024, it was clear he was leading in the polls. So that would only reaffirm why the polls would make more sense to indicate how now he's very unpopular. He was always unpopular. Democrats still lost to him. That's a huge whoopsie. That's a huge question mark about what's going wrong there. But he's gotten even less popular as he's actually started to govern at a rapid pace. But despite that, he is claiming that he's very interested. He doesn't know how, but he's very interested in serving an unconstitutional third term.
They are good people.
You said that for 2028, they're very good people.
Well, we have great people. I don't have to get into that, but we have one of them standing right here. We have JD, obviously. The vice president is great. I think Marco's great. I think, I'm not sure if anybody would run against us. I think if they ever formed a group, it would be unstoppable. I really do. I believe that.
Okay, so right now he's talking about who else could be it, because that was part of the question. And Marco's doing the most ridiculous. What? No, wait, what? Who, me? No. Stop. As if that's not what you're thinking about every single day, Marco.
I really do. I believe that. I would love to do it. I have my best numbers ever. It's very terrible. I have my best numbers. If you read it, am I not ruling it out? You'll have to tell me. All I can tell you is that we have a great group of people, which they don't. They have Jasmine Crockett, a low IQ person. They have AOC's low IQ. You give her an
Oh, is that one of the cognitive tests? Okay, well, at one point there he said, no, I'm not. One is he's ruling it out. Okay, so he just keeps saying that as Bannon is saying they have a plan and it's all just serious until it's not, then it's silly. Because Bannon's going, no, seriously. There's a plan to figure out a way to let him run again unconstitutionally. But then whenever he goes, I don't know, maybe. And there's outrage. The response from the Scott Jennings of the world is he's trolling. It's just a goofy joke. Then you look back to Bannon, he goes, it's not a joke, it's serious. So then you have people like Eric Erickson saying, y'all, Donald Trump's term limited. He'll be gone January 20th, 2029. I think this obsession with believing he won't leave office is bad for people already struggling with mental health concerns. You're going to be okay. The country will be okay. The Constitution will be okay. Yeah. This is what's causing all the depression. We could address it if the liberals want to be so hyperbolic. Then Mehdi says, same kind of vibes. I didn't remember this. Mick Mulvaney in November of 2020 wrote an op-ed saying if he loses, Trump will concede gracefully. He never conceded. January 6th happened. Fake electors happened. The Pence thing happened. Find me 11,780 votes happened. That's the most oof op-ed ever. Gracefully. Not even he'll concede. Gracefully. Would you call, even if you like Trump, would you call what he did, which wasn't a concession, he never conceded to this day, and he's still ranting about it on social media, but would you call whatever he did graceful? Not at all. Thank you, Joe. And then he'll connect random stories like this. What's worse, the NBA players cheating at cards and probably much else, or the Democrats cheating on elections? The 2020 election, and he just starts ranting about that. Oh, yeah, the basketball cheating scandal thing? Well, what about the 2020 election? Get smart, Republicans, before it's too late. He also says we know everything. As we're giving you brain damage there, cutting back and forth. Now, this was very exciting to Monica Crowley, who said, buckle up, to Trump's quote, we know everything. Monica, why do you think, how is it we're, so many years out from the first time Trump said we were going to divulge everything we know, and he still hasn't? Look how much he's posted. A different post. Just in, documents show conclusively that Christopher Wray, deranged Jack Smith, Merrick Garland, Lisa Monaco, and other crooked lowlife for the failed Biden administration signed off on Operation Arctic Frost. They spied on senators and congressmen, women, and even tapped their calls. We addressed that lie before. They accessed phone records to get us into the timeline, which is obvious during an investigation into this election stealing attempt. They cheated and rigged the 2020 presidential election. So think about that timeline. You know how Trump posted that Biden's FBI had agents in the crowd on January 6th when Trump was president? Now he's saying that the Biden administration officials, Biden had one term after Trump's first, rigged the 2020 presidential election. Jack Smith, who had nothing to do with Biden until well into his administration. How is that possible? That's time travel type stuff. Confusing. Speaking of Biden, he returned to give a speech.
Folks, we can't.
See, my impression's actually based on the real world. Folks,
We can't kid ourselves. We are in one of those moments right now. In my over 50 years in elected public life, this is the worst I've seen it. If Ted were here today, he'd still be fighting like hell, but his optimism would be surely tested. Because truth be told, our very democracy is at stake, in my view. We all agree that our politics is broken, that political violence, never acceptable, is out of hand, that America should be a place not of extremism and fury, but of decency and grace, that our institutions are what makes us the envy of the world, and our democracy is worth fighting like hell for.
So there it is. There's Joe. And then I saw this. The White House's East Wing construction rubble was taken to East Potomac Golf Course. It was reported that the rubble will be used to create mounds on the golf course, which, is this from a newspaper nearby? Is this one of Trump's golf courses? He's shown interest in refurbishing. Yeah, okay, so it's a golf course that he's interested in refurbishing. There's something interesting about that. There's something interesting about the rubble being used on a golf course, just imagery-wise. Then Trump posted someone else's photo of him that said, "I want to thank Donald Trump for working like a dog." What is it with dogs? For no money to save a country that doesn't appreciate his sacrifice. Thank you, Mr. President. And Trump goes, "Thank you. Big progress." It's so weird to post a meme of yourself. Not a meme, but whatever. Photo with caption. That's a meme. But thanking you and saying people don't appreciate you enough. And being like, right on. I'm with you. Something else.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
There is some new report
today that America should be a place.
Interesting about that. There's something interesting about the
Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained.
She was afraid and that she was hurt, and I made sure she was in a safe place. I offered to call her mom and her older brother, Danny, which I did. So at this point, I know things are not good in their household. So in the interim period between that and her death, she did a couple of things. She was in a car wreck, which was terrible. After she was in a car wreck, she sent me and another member of our team an email saying, "In the case of my passing, I want this book published, not just for me, but for all survivors of sexual abuse. It's important." So we had that email. Then she made public in a statement to People magazine that she was a victim of domestic abuse.
Mhm.
So at that point, her swearing me to secrecy on the 2015 incident
Was, yeah.
no longer holds because she's made it public.
Right.
And then tragically, she killed herself in late April. So as we prepared to publish the book, we had all the things you typically need. We had a locked manuscript approved by the author. We had, all
like protection mode, right? It was
Right.
always this protection mode of like, you're going to see things, but I don't want this evil to touch you. So we had found out when our daughter was born right around that time in like 2014, 2013. And that's when she
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. The
from Malaysia, chicken pea, an important leopard shell.
Hi, I'm Andy Levian, General Counsel at the DNC. We just sued President Trump and Doge, and I hope you will support.
It is great to welcome back to the program today Nathan Taylor, the Executive Director of Public Engagement for Election Truth Alliance. Nathan, it's great to have you back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Hopefully your inbox didn't absolutely explode since last time.
Well, listen, I don't want to redo the first interview. People should watch that interview. We're going to try to sort of build on that. But in the first interview, to sort of summarize, you brought us information that you believed pointed to irregularities and red flags within the 2024 election results. And we explained the methodology. We looked at heat maps. We looked at hand counts versus machine counts. And we sort of left it as Nathan has presented a case, the audience can evaluate, I can evaluate, and then we will come back. Is that sort of a fair assessment of where we were?
Yes, yes.
Good. So listen, I'm going to put the lead, I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to put it up front, okay? I am not convinced that there has been any kind of fraud or rigging based on an analysis I've done speaking to other statisticians about your work. Now, I want to give you the opportunity to respond, so I'll just kind of lay it out as I see it. You presented us some heat maps. They show some statistical patterns, that's for sure. I didn't find evidence of fraud in the heat maps, which you conceded, right? I mean, you said the heat maps are a signal that we should look into. I have not found evidence of fraud in the heat maps necessarily. And then I went further and I said, can I find any direct evidence of a vote change or manipulation? And I didn't. And what I did find is that Republicans performed pretty damn strongly in 2024 up and down the ballot. And what I mean by that is Trump won. The Republicans did well in the Senate. The Republicans did well in the House. And to me, that sort of raises an Occam's razor question, which is what is more likely here? That a conspiracy involving multiple states and election officials successfully rigged machines while leaving intact paper trails, but fooling audits and all? Or did Republicans just kind of do well? And where I land right now, Nathan, is I think Republicans just did well.
I love it. Excellent points. Those are the very same points I've actually come to address today.
Okay.
Prepared. And you bring up the same things we're hearing when we put out the Minnesota report, when we've started making public some of our additional findings, and happy to talk about some of the on-the-ground findings that have been made public recently. Main pushback, as you said, right, is people cannot, I'd say people argue, very valid, that if this happened, right, if the idea of if there was a grand compromise of our systems, it would have to be a massive operation, right? And it would have been leaked by now. It would have required so much coordination across multiple states, etc.
Well, let me pause only because I don't want you to respond to a claim I'm not making. I do think it is true. I didn't make an assertion about the number of people that would need to be involved. I did make an assertion about how widespread and all-encompassing it would have had to be. But I think the biggest thing I'm kind of looking at right now is we would have some of what I would consider direct evidence rather than the heat maps and the statistical representations of data that you've presented. That's, I think, where I am right now.
Yes, and that's an excellent point, because if there's smoke, there's fire. And where's the fire, right? You know, if there's all of these concerns. Now, I will highlight, as you said, the analysis that the ETA has been making public is not proof of election fraud. Statistics on their own is not proof of election fraud.
Right.
It is at best a good indicator of where you should go and investigate and where you should go look. And as I mentioned in our, when you talked to me last time, the ETA has actually been investigating on the ground in the places that we've been flagging concerns. And some of that is Florida, and we'll talk about that here shortly.
Yeah.
But there's other places as well that we will be making public very soon with some legal action. And I can talk just a little bit about some of those other findings. But a few things I wanted to bring up that aren't well known right now. And as you said, right, if there was a compromise of our systems, where's the additional support? Where's the concerns? Well, a few things that most people may have heard of, but may not have actually looked into, is that Per the reports of the FBI and the NSA, Russia was found to have been involved in a targeted campaign to breach county election systems and their voter registration databases across all 50 states in 2016. Now, there are some caveats about what they say are the implications, but what's important is we've also found during our investigations, and we'll actually show you some examples, but they successfully infiltrated 2 counties in Florida. And one of those is St. Lucie County. And we've actually been investigating St. Lucie County for the 24 election on the ground. And we've been releasing reports with some other investigative journalists. We'll talk about some of those findings. And as you said, you want hard evidence of actual issues.
Well, let me mention, I mean, about
Yes.
the infiltration. Tell me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that the reporting is Russia did target all 50 states in 2016.
Yes.
And that the word infiltrated seems a little squishy to me because, number one, I know that there are county officials that deny that county was infiltrated, but I believe the consensus is that not a single vote was impacted, and that was 8 years ago, and a lot has changed since 8 years ago, right? I mean, we're using 8-year-old data.
Well, here's some important pieces.
Yeah.
One, it is confirmed by these public reports and a recent book that came out as well. I think it's called Rage, where they confirmed that not only did they get into the systems in St. Lucie County, Florida in 2016, but there were concerns that the malware involved could have allowed manipulation, but they didn't find any actual evidence.
Well, it's a little more than that, though, Nathan. I want to be
Yes.
fully clear with my audience. It's not only that, it's that what they were able to infiltrate with the malware was the voter registration
Yes.
database, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that is not the voting system.
Are you looking for the most affordable way to add electric heating and cooling to your older home? If that's the case, then you're going to...
It is not, but
okay, good.
There are, generally speaking, 2 systems we use, right? You've got your registration,
yes,
which is, a account of who can show up to vote. And you've got your tabulation system, or however you count your votes. In the US, it's system, it's machine-based.
Totally.
What's important is, as we've dug a little deeper, especially now, we are starting to bring up some major concerns. There's one other piece is there was, per 2016, the Illinois State Board of Elections did report that not only was their voter registration database breached, but they found that they didn't find any manipulation or changes, but they did report that over 200,000 registered voters' information was stolen. So we bring this up. And what's important is, yes, we're not saying that any changes happened in 2016. But what's important is a few things. One, if you have successfully infiltrated a system, cybersecurity wise, there are concerns of one, how did you do it? Can you do it again? And what do you get out of it? And so it's kind of the equivalent of saying, well, the robbers broke into the house. They didn't steal anything, but, we're all good to go. Well, our concern is maybe they didn't change anything when they came into the system, but just having access to the voter registration information allows you to know who is active and who is inactive in voting. And if you were to successfully compromise both systems, now you have the list of people who are eligible to vote, and you could potentially vote for them. And so those are concerns. As I said, there's no current evidence that's been made public showing that this has happened yet.
Right.
But what's important is those are 2 pieces of the pie you would need to successfully manipulate elections, especially digitally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that those might be necessary, but they certainly wouldn't be sufficient. We agree on that.
It would require a bit more effort as well.
Yeah.
And
I guess the issue I came up, and by the way, I think you're doing really good work, and I think everything you're doing is valuable. I'm just giving my opinion of where I come down, and I just think Republicans won, and I wish it wasn't the case. I think every one of these things is worthy of investigation. I think the problem sometimes, people who point to smoke and say, this means there's fire, and fire means one particular thing, sometimes exclude other explanations, which in our first interview, as I presented them, you kind of acknowledged, yes, it also could be that, but we're worried that it's this other thing. Totally legitimate. As one example, we talked about the Clark County stuff in Nevada and this artificial cap on turnout. And one of the things I found when researching Clark County, a lot of older folks in that county, right? Demographically, it's kind of an interesting county. If you're counting turnout as votes divided by registered voters. If you had outdated voter rolls, maybe because it's a population that skews older, maybe because a lot of those folks have passed away, that would give you a signal that might look like smoke, artificially low turnout. And in fact, it's a result of the demographics of Clark County. This is like one micro example of how you've identified some smoke. Awesome. I've found a source of the fire that may be different than what you are alluding to. Fair to say? Am I explaining it clearly at least?
Yeah, that's good. And the main point is, as we said, we kind of make the findings public so that we can have these conversations.
Right.
Good pushback for Nevada, though. And as we actually put in our reports, is we don't use turnout to do that analysis for Nevada. It is based purely on the cast vote record, which is the individual vote cast per voting machine, per voting location. So there is no turnout analysis in that. And the effects we're seeing, the strong shift in the amount of votes Trump is getting after 250 or so ballots cast per machine or per location, it does bring up some other concerns because we have started looking at those down ballot races, the partisan and nonpartisan races. And as you said, if we're looking for some smoke, one of the symptoms that has been brought up time and time again by election fraud experts across the world, for example, Roman UDOT, Sergei Shvilkin, they put out papers and reports looking at Russian elections, looking at more normal like Swedish elections, and they flagged that the symptoms they see in what is attributed to be manipulation in Russian elections is that there is some type of effect where, for example, in the 2011 Russian election, it'll be like 80-90% turnout for polling locations, and then that is where a very large spike of the votes begins to be seen for the pro-Putin party. And it matches the concerns we've been finding across the U.S. But as you said, it itself is not proof of election fraud. So what I'd like to do is I would like to go back and very quickly touch on what we recently put out for the Minnesota and the hand count data. I want to make an update on that. And then I'd like to talk about Florida and the on-the-ground investigations that have been conducted there and the things we're finding.
And what would be great as you do that is give us the top lines and then we'll dig into it just so people don't get lost. Yeah.
Got it. All right. So for Minnesota, very simple. The ETA, after we last spoke about some of that initial preliminary data we put up, we have now put on our website, electiontruthealliance.org, a special report for Minnesota. We are looking at, I believe, District 8. Let me verify here. But yes, District 8, Minnesota. And so some important pieces is District 8 has those hand count rural areas that were small enough where they hand counted and never counted their votes digitally during the 24 election. And then they have the rest of the county and the rest of the district, which is machine based. And pretty much what we put in that report, and as we spoke about last time, is we are seeing a significant discrepancy between the locations that hand counted versus the locations that machine counted.
Yes.
Well, I want to address a few things first and foremost. Well, in our initial preliminary report that we put out, the heat map had some errors in it that we went back and we made a follow-up, address, and we said, hey, here were the errors, here's the update and the corrections. Did it change our concerns? Absolutely not. And what our report actually does, and we visualize it for you, is we're showing that of the same size rural areas, the same amount of registered voters and amount of voters in these precincts for hand count and hand count precincts versus machine count precincts, we did that direct comparison, not only the presidential race, but we did this as well for the down ballot races. So we did the presidential, the Senate, and the House for the District 8 of Minnesota. And we show that statistically speaking. And the reason why we think it is important is, as we said before, right? If there was a compromise of our systems, what would normal look like versus what would abnormal look like? And per our analysis and per the work of Roman UDOT and Sergei Shvilkin and their statistical findings, they argue this. They say that a normal election should have little to no relationship between the amount of turnout or the amount of voters that are showing up across multiple locations and the amount of vote a candidate is getting. In layman's terms, it means that you shouldn't see a substantial change in the percentage of votes a candidate is getting from low turnout to medium to high turnout. And we actually see that effect. And I do have a visual for you. It's the first visual in what I sent you. And it shows the hand count on the right, scatter plot wise, versus the machine count. And we see that. We see that in these precincts that hand counted in District 8, the relationship is flat. And Trump is winning a majority of the votes in those locations. And that was one of the issues we found in that initial heat map, is that, in fact, those rural areas that were hand counted when we fixed the data based on over 50% or higher registration voters to get rid of the noise, Trump is winning in those hand count, smaller, more rural areas.
So can you've said a lot, Nathan, and I want to keep
Yes.
it conversational so the audience doesn't get lost and we take these things one by one. You're completely right in how you are representing the data in terms of the relationship between turnout, hand versus machine count, and who people were likely to vote for. This was something we talked about last time. I think it's extraordinarily important to look into that. However, I see a differential diagnosis that doesn't point to subterfuge, and that includes demographic differences. In other words, these areas, precincts that you have indicated are more likely to go Trump. They are, by their nature, I believe, more likely for demographic reasons to be Trump precincts, if that makes sense. And I think when I said that last time, you said, I don't have anything to rebut that. I'm just investigating other explanations, which I think is great. I think, to be honest, not honest, I think you're being honest, to be robust in our analysis, we have to be able to explain away the demographic differences that exist, whether some of these areas had more mobilization or community characteristics that impacted turnout, whether some of these had barriers to voting or access issues in terms of early voting or number of places to vote, this sort of thing. And I don't believe you've done that yet.
Hey, Mario Lopez here, and if you're struggling with $20,000, $30,000, even $50,000 of debt or more, I'm talking about credit cards.
So I would actually push back and say that this recent analysis, we did dive into a little bit more of the demographics.
Okay.
And actually, I agree with you in what you said, and that was the main pushback we had, was the demographics of the hand-counted areas, we believe, is Trump aligned, and we do show that. But what we're highlighting is less of the demographics and more of the behavior that the voters are exhibiting. And that's what's important, is we're saying that even though in these hand count areas that Trump is winning the amount of votes, he's getting a majority of the votes in these smaller precincts that were hand counted in the district, the relationship those precincts are showing is normal human voting behavior. We don't see that in higher turnouts, Trump is getting more votes. We don't see that here. We actually see he's keeping around the same amount of votes across all of the range of turnouts. But this is why we compare it then to the machine count precincts. And these are the same size precincts, by the way. So we said, let's look at just the precincts across the rest of the county and the rest of the district and look at them and say, if these are similar demographics, they're more rural areas, they have the same amount of voters in them, how does it compare? And that's where we've been flagging that there is a strong relationship for our analysis where in places of higher turnout, Trump is getting more votes. And I'll give you a rough estimate. I believe the relationship is almost 1-to-1, meaning for every 10%. So for example, if we start and we look at precincts of 60% turnout, let's say Trump is getting close to 45% or so. These are just, rough estimates.
Yeah.
And then let's say you go up to 70%. Trump is on average getting 10% more votes per 10% turnout. That's a 1-to-1. That is a huge red flag because we're not seeing this in other places that look statistically normal. And I wanted to show this last piece for you and just explain why this is abnormal voter behavior-wise. This is the third graph. This is a new way of looking at the scatter plots in the math without it just being a big blob of dots. And I understand, it's hard to look at the big blob of dots and scatter plots and be like, okay. So what we did, this analysis is the same thing. This is all of the precincts in the district, for example. And instead of just showing them as a scatter plot, we put them in bins. We grouped them by 10%. So lowest turnout precincts in the district is 30% turnout. Highest is roughly somewhere to 90-95%. And so all we did is we said, let's look at that relationship between as turnout increased or precincts of higher turnout versus precincts of lower turnout, how are both candidates performing? And this is where we flagged the same concern we're seeing in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina, and we've now just made public in Florida. And it's the same type of relationship we're seeing in Nevada, but they don't use turnout. And what's important is, and we'll talk about this for Florida, we've started looking at what we would argue is more normal behavior, and it seems to be exhibited in mail-in voting. And I think we touched base on this last time, I don't recall, but we said mail-in looks statistically normal, but when we look at election day or early voting, the effect we're seeing is what this third graph shows. And I'll explain what this shows. It shows that, for example, from 30% turnout to around 70% turnout. So precincts from 30 to 70%, Trump has a majority of the votes, but it begins to decrease as turnout is increasing across all of these precincts.
Hold
And
on,
then
am
we
I looking at the
actually
wrong
see-
chart? Because to me, it looks like,
Third.
are we looking at District 8 turnout binning right now?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, it looks to me like Trump's share goes up, not down.
So I was saying Harris. So
Oh,
if
okay.
I was wrong,
I think you
correction.
said Trump, but you meant Harris.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
So good catch. So at 70% and lower turnout, Harris has a majority of the votes. And then we
Yep.
actually see almost a stair step, right? Where higher turnout, more votes for Trump until Trump actually begins to win a majority of the votes around 80%. And then around 90%, they kind of switch again. And
Now,
what's
why would
important-
Harris go back up and win at 90% turnout? In other words, Trump only ended up with the slightest margin of victory at the 80% level, and even there, it's barely. Why does Harris go back up?
Well, a good point to looking at these bins, and this one doesn't show it, is you want to look at how many votes are in each of these bins and how many precincts. So there is a little bit of statistical noise when you do it by fixed percentages. So I assume there's not a lot of
Tired of sifting through jobs that don't feel like the right fit?
True disclosure today in the publication of Virginia Roberts Giuffre's posthumous autobiography, the title Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. Co-author Amy Wallace joins us in just a moment. Giuffre died by suicide earlier this year, but she documented the abuse she suffered at the hands of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Quoting now from the book, "Just when I thought things couldn't get worse for me, they did. Epstein trafficked me to a man who raped me more savagely than anyone had before. We were on Epstein's island when I was ordered to take this man to a cabana. Immediately, it was clear that this man, whom I've taken pains to describe in legal filings only as a well-known prime minister, wasn't interested in caresses. He wanted violence. He repeatedly choked me until I lost consciousness and took pleasure in seeing me in fear for my life." About Prince Andrew, she writes, quote, "I hadn't wanted to have sex with the prince, I said, but I felt I had to. Our livelihoods depended on it, for one thing, but I also truly believed there was no way for me to free myself from Epstein and Maxwell's grip." And then there's this, quote, "He put his hand on my back, a fond gesture that was rare for him. I hope you know how much I appreciate you for embracing my lifestyle," he began, as Maxwell cozied up to me, up next to me too. "Over the past several months, you've shown me a devotion that is difficult to find. The friends I've introduced you to agree. You are a delightful young woman." He took a breath and wondered where all this was going, and I wondered where all this was going. Then he came out with it. "Jenna, I want you to have our baby." Joining us now is her co-author, Amy Wallace. It's just remarkable, the details in this. Near the end of the book, she says, "I don't regret it, but the constant telling and retelling has been extremely painful and exhausting. With this book, I seek to free myself from my past." You worked with her for 4 years. How do you think she would feel to have this out in the public now?
Well, she made it very clear how she would feel because she sent me an email about 3 weeks before she died saying, in the case of my passing, I want this book published, not just for me, but for all survivors of sexual abuse, not just Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but for anyone who has been coerced into sex against their will. So she very much wanted this book published, and I think she would be very proud, and it's a victory for her even after her passing.
She writes in the book, "I believe that I might die a sex slave." And another point says, "Inside I was seething. Day and night, my every waking moment was circumscribed by his wants and needs," talking about Epstein. "I was caught in the trap of familiar diminishment, but still something about Epstein's hold on me kept me docile and acquiescent." What do you think it was at the core of it?
Well, I think she writes about this really eloquently. You know, there's sort of a predator's playbook in this narrative, in this memoir. Not only were these girls deceived lured into a home thinking they were going to give a massage and then sexually, raped and assaulted by both Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. But then they were also had this sort of mental jujitsu that the classic groomer does, which is, we are going to degrade you sexually, emotionally, physically, but we are also going to tell you, we see something in you, you're special. And a lot of these girls had not heard that ever, and some of them definitely had not heard it enough. And there was this class issue as well. They were poor girls for the most part. They were chosen from the seedier side of the tracks. They were desperate financially, and these posh people were telling them they saw promise in them. And there was Virginia writes about it really movingly, that was kind of what kept her enmeshed in that world, because she did feel validated in a very strange way. In her case also, and this may have been true for other victims, she was actually threatened by Jeffrey Epstein. He showed her a picture of Sky, who I believe you've interviewed, her younger brother, 5 years younger, and said, we know where he goes to school. If you ever turn on me, I will hurt him. So she had a lot of things keeping her in line.
She also writes, there's a lot of blame placed on Maxwell in addition to Epstein. She said at one point that she saw them as two halves of a wicked whole. I wonder, what do you think she would make of Maxwell now being moved to this other, less secure, cozier prison?
Well, I think she would be aghast at the moving her to basically a club fed. It's a minimum security prison. She would also be aghast at the idea that anyone is considering possibly pardoning this woman. She's not only a proven sexual predator, she's been convicted in a court of law of being involved in the whole sexual trafficking scheme. So this book makes clear that Ghislaine Maxwell was not just the receptionist that kept the notes on when the next girl was going to come, and not just a procurer, although she did procure, and that was in itself evil, but she also sexually abused these young girls herself. She said to them repeatedly, come over here and sexually service me. She hurt them. Virginia describes a scene where Ghislaine hurt her during sex with a variety of ghastly sex tools to make her pay for something that Ghislaine was angry at her about. So this woman is an abuser in her own right, and the fact that anyone is even bandying about the idea that she might be pardoned is just unthinkable.
Yeah, it's just such a. The whole thing is just so awful. To have her voice out there, though, I think is so important. It puts, it makes her into much more of a human, since she's not here to speak for herself right now.
Well, and that was a real goal of the book. Obviously a lot of the most terrible things in the book have gotten a lot of attention over the past week as it's been about to be released today. But we really tried to depict her as a woman in full. This was a complicated person. This was a person who had a huge heart. This was a person who not only had very terrible things happen to her in her childhood and her young adulthood, but she also then escaped from those two people. She then became a mom. She then became an advocate. And we show her in that evolution. Pressing for the world to be a better place for all of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. I appreciate it.
Of course, I really appreciate it.
The book is Nobody's Girl. Amy Wallace, thank you.